So, without further ado, I'd love to welcome to the stage Fred, who will also introduce himself. And also, I've got today joining me, Gavin Starks will be joining me online as well. The name for the name? Oh. Yeah, thank you, sorry. Yes, Fred, lovely to see you. Not the name, the title of the talk is We Won't Get to Net Zero Without Artificial Intelligence, which feels pretty good. Yeah. Gavin, are you there? Yep, great, nice. Are you there? I can see you there, excellent.
Morning, yep.
Everyone know it's a big deal? I was going to start with a big preamble about why it's a big deal. Do we all know what we're up against? Yeah? Yeah? OK, great, we won't do that bit. But we've got a very short amount of time. Some people say 7 years. I think it's probably more like 3. So we need to leave this room with like, OK, here are our actions, here's what we're going to do, and I hope by the end of this particular part of the segment, we shall have covered off that. So firstly, I'd love to welcome both of you to the stage. Fred, first, would you like to tell us who you are and perhaps what perspective you're bringing to the day, what organization you're from, and then Gavin, after that, I would love for you to do the same as well. Thank you.
Yeah, Frederick Ryan. I've worked with Frost & Sullivan. I lead our sustainability in the circular economy practice. And what I bring to this is, if you look at the net zero transition, you're looking at a net zero transition which involves micro transitions of energy, water, food, and the nexus. And that's why we've launched a new practice for sustainability in the circular economy. And this is throwing up some really interesting insights of collaboration, and I'd like to share some of that in this discussion. Yeah.
We're very excited. We've already been talking, so we're quite excited to bring some things. And Gavin, would you like to... I'm going to point there to Gavin, because he's there for me, but he's there for you. So I don't know which way I should do. But Gavin, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Good morning, everyone. My name's Gavin Starks. I'm the founder of Icebreaker One, and we're a non-profit with a mission to make data work harder to deliver net zero. We're working across the industrial sectors, energy, water, transport, agriculture, and the built world to really help the data flow. How can we get access to the data? There's a piece here of the jigsaw that if we don't have access to the data, then the AI has nothing to feed on. And we need to get greater access to that information to help all of the tools that everyone's building.
Yeah, that feels really true. You were talking yesterday about the plumbing or the pipes, having a system that goes across everything. Would you like to talk a little bit to that?
Certainly. So part of the background that we're building on here is I used to run the Open Data Institute and I co-chaired the development of a standard called the Open Banking Standard. What that has enabled is access to data across the financial system. So that hundreds of different fintech companies and release companies can get access to financial information. That's then enabled them to build all manner of analytics on top of that. So what we're doing now is just saying, like, in order to get these flexibility markets in energy, where you've got a whole range of different microgeneration, renewables, existing infrastructure, and so on, as well as electric vehicles, say, in the energy mix, how are all of these systems going to play together? Well, they all need to exchange information with each other very, very efficiently. And when we look at, say, the built worlds, worked with a company called Demand Logic, where we're doing using AI to look at buildings and creating digital twins of the buildings and the energy flows through that building, through buildings. And there you can have 130 billion time series data as a training set for the models. And that then enables the better usage or identification of wastage, identification of interventions that can be made to increase the efficiency of what's there. So really the data is a lifeblood here of how these systems are going to talk to each other and how they're going to be analyzed. So the more we can reduce the friction of access to information, the more the AI models are going to be better.
Yeah, that really hit home for me, actually, that point, is that requirement for us to have so much more open data so we can provide much better solutions. And so the space that I work in, we work with a lot of large organizations that have got lots of stuff in silos, both in their supply chains, but also within their sectors, or also within their individual business units. Unless we can surface that data and effectively work with it at scale, we're going to be so challenged, I think, to really overcome the level of challenges that we've got in front of us. Gavin, I'd love to tell us a little bit about a couple of projects. One is Open Net Zero, and the other is the work that you did with Arup. Please spend a short amount of time doing it. And I think the reason why the Arup thing is because I think people here might be thinking about, oh, how might I work with someone to do something if I'm in data?
Yeah, I think these are great examples. So one of the things that we found over the years is that the typical response when organizations or multinationals or even governments and countries face some kind of challenge is they start off by trying to build some kind of centralized portal where everybody has to send their data in. That tends not to be the right long-term solution. It's certainly an element of what can be done, but the much more powerful way of connecting information is to use the system that we've already got, which is called the web, and build up upon that in order to connect data rather than just collecting it. And so Open Net Zero is an initiative where we've launched a search engine for net zero data. And that's not just for open data, it's for the data that people don't want to share, it's for the commercial and more sensitive information. But within that, we can build around what we call a trust framework to allow permissioned sharing of information within a closed group of organizations, but at scale. And so, for example, there we're looking at things like ESG data, energy data. I'll come back to again with the Arab example. But the starting point here is, can we find things in the first place? And so one of the baseline challenges that we've got is that we don't know what information is out there. So when people are trying to make a decision, does the data exist that they need in order to make a decision or inform that decision? Is it material enough? Is the quality good enough? Does it exist in the first place? And so the starting point for us was to say, well, look, can we enable people to more easily find it and access it and then use it? So Open Net Zero is an open source project to help the discovery of all manner of net zero data. The Arab example, just to move on to that, we've been working with Arab since we started. Arab's a really good example of a large organization that has thousands, if not tens of thousands of projects active at any one time. And the challenge there is, how do you start embedding sustainability into every single project? How do those projects learn from each other? Arab's made a huge commitment to net zero and the Sustainable Development Goals. And so they've been partnering with us to say, well, how can they provide better access both internally across silos, as well as working with us on large-scale programs. And one of our largest programs at the moment is called Open Energy, which is to open up access to all the energy data in the UK across all of the network operators, right the way through the whole data value chain. And these sort of cascade impacts, how if you're working on a construction project and you're looking to integrate the design stage, different elements and different learnings from different systems, how can you start embodying them right from the outset? Again, right the way through to the operationalization. If you're building digital twins, how can we get access to all of that information, given that there isn't really an edge to the systems information we need here? If you're trying to model a building and its built environment, then you need to start looking outside of the areas that you have a direct control over. And I just want to build on that just a little bit with the work we've been doing in the insurance sector, where we looked at what is a climate-ready building. And there it's expanding the risk profile of the way that we typically look at buildings from the risk modeling perspective, to include much more of those externalities, more of that the environment in which those buildings exist, and how can we better optimize the entire system, whether that's to minimize flood risk or whether it's to maximize energy efficiency. The number of use cases is vast, and so rather than trying to chip off each project one at a time, if we can provide access to the underlying information, then the innovators in this room can come and find the information they need and access it, and more easily either access it as open data or license it as shared data.
That's fantastic, thank you. I think probably having worked in sustainability or that sort of space for quite some time, we've seen it go from the peripherals now to the very heart of business-making decisions: risk, operations, supply chain, procurement. Those are the real spaces where particular transformational work is happening. And so if you're in one of those roles, or if you're working into one of those roles, now is the time to really upskill in terms of what your sustainability knowledge is, and to really understand the potential for that particular role and how that particular role could play a role in transforming those organizations. Thanks, Gavin, for sharing. That's fantastic. Hi, Fred. Nice to see you, buddy. I feel a little bit away from you there. I'm going to slightly face you.
Sure.
Would you like to give us a little bit about your because you sit in a fairly interesting and unique position within the sector. Would you like to share a little bit about that and perhaps some of the things that you would like to share today with everyone?
Yeah, one of the areas we've been looking at is AI for sustainability, and drawing on some of the points that Gavin was mentioning, cities. 60% of the emissions contributed by the cities, a complex ecosystem, and if you look at how cities are trying to tackle this, you have close to 10,000 cities who have already signed up for net zero, but they do not have the information that's needed to develop the climate action plans. Most of the data is inaccurate, not fit for purpose, and where AI comes in brings in scale, speed, and benefits in terms of savings.
Hang on, I love that, scale and speed, right? We have 3 to 7 years. Scale and speed is the way that we need to be really thinking about this. And yeah, sorry, I just wanted to really highlight that because that was really, real strong for me.
Yeah, and what came across is when we were speaking to the city mayors who are trying to devise their climate action plans, they do not have the data. So we're seeing some really interesting solutions being developed on satellite imaging-based solutions using mesh sensors, which is then fit for purpose for these cities to get real-time greenhouse gas emission data. And this is up to localized information, because in a city ecosystem, you have mobility, which is the largest emission contributor, but also energy and the buildings side. So what cities are looking for is not just top-level data, but more micro-level data to target their measures in an effective manner. And also, what this helps the cities is, once they're putting in measures in place, because you have two buckets. You have climate mitigation and adaptation. So if they're putting in measures on mitigation, they want to make sure how these measures are being effective so that they're able to track what difference these measures are then bringing about. And why this becomes even more important going forward is for funding for these measures in cities, because they need a good data to be able to substantiate some of the funding mechanisms to even progress with this. And this is especially important in the developing countries, where cities will need significant funds to address these issues, and these solutions will be able to do this. And what we're also seeing is, if cities are not being able to finance these measures, you're seeing the developers actually bringing the development banks to support the cities to finance these projects as well. So that, I think, is going to be even more instrumental, because right now we want both scale and speed. And if you want these cities to get these systems and solutions deployed and making sure that they are addressing these issues, they need to do it now,
That's great. We recently did some research with GS1, who do all the barcodes for all products in all the world. And we wanted to know what blockers they had towards implementing sustainability. And one of the key blockers was access to data, and the second one was access to public data. So one is, can I see how I'm doing, and can I help other people to help me, whether it be unlocking funding or something else? And the public one is, can we be held to account in a public way and inspire others to also be public with their data? It's such key elements that could potentially transform so much, and yet at the moment, it's a real opportunity gap, I think, in that space. Fred, you talked about transformation enablers as well, which really I was like, what's that? Would you like to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think when you look at the macro transition of net zero in Europe, and you have the EU Green Deal of 2050, it is a macro transition, but it involves micro transitions. You have the energy transition, the water, food, materials, mobility. And once we try and understand these individual silos, this is where digital comes on its own, of connecting the dots, looking at the synergies and how you bring it to a new level. And AI can play a significant role in this, in terms of understanding the complexities and then being able to draw the solutions in this. The examples that Ever Impact is done in these solutions, even the AI for Cities project with Keros is involved here in Europe, is transformational in that sense. And if you look at some of the cities in the developing world, the way they're going about it is they're looking at addressing first mobility. We were looking at cities in India, the smart cities movement in India. They're looking at mobility as the first one, and then they would go on to energy and other elements. But mobility is the biggest enabler there when you look at India.
You also mentioned satellites as well when we were talking. Is that?
Yeah, I think that's the transformation that we're seeing. And as an enabler, the pace of development of satellite technology is really going to drive this change, both in terms of the speed, the quality of data that we're going to get to support these solutions is going to be quite transformational.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we even call it the sustainable satellite economy, how satellites can play a role in driving sustainability in some of these opportunities.
It's that macro view that really helps us to really figure out what our role is within it, you know? I made a short list of like, here are these key areas, there may be others. So circular economy, like how can we be more resource efficient? Financial systems, not in the way that you think about it, but how we share value, looking at degrowth, looking at other things, how we're working around value in different ways. Nature, obviously massive, like we're facing a massive biodiversity crash. Supply chain and scope 3 emissions, huge opportunities in that space. Water, which Fred will talk about later. And then governance as well, like how we govern. Can we govern in a more effective way through using big data? And last but most definitely not least, the just transition. And I think this is extremely important when looking at data. Are we including the lives of everyone when we think about what solutions we're developing? And I think we talk about AI, ethics of AI a little bit, or quite a lot, but how are we involving climate justice or environmental justice or social justice in some of these technologically based solutions that we're developing? We've got 3 minutes to, well, these very tight sessions, actually. We've got 3 minutes. I'd love to give Gavin, there's so much that you could have shared and so much you could have talked about. So you have 1 minute to either share key actionable takeaways or something that you feel like you wanted to share that you didn't get a chance to share. And then Fred, you'll have the same.
Thank you. Well, I think one of the things I hear all the time with practitioners in AI is garbage in, garbage out. If we don't have good information feeding these models and feeding these systems, it makes it harder, and we might end up steering ourselves in the wrong direction. There's another challenge, as you said, right at the heart of this, is we need to move very quickly. We can't treat this as business as usual. We need to actually transform a lot of our sectors and drive to net zero. We're heading towards a lower carbon future, but I'm not convinced yet we're moving to a net zero future. And so we really need to both accelerate and be able to measure that impact. And there's a whole raft of systems. The good news is you've got Earth observation, you've got sensor information, you've got the web itself, which is the most successful information architecture in history. We have the tools at our disposal today. And so my call to action is focus on the impact rather than the technologies. There's lots of people creating very sexy technologies, which I love, but we need to really double down on where the impact is and share that as much as possible. And then we need to encourage reciprocity. We need to share the information we've got out into the market in a way that other people can find it. Whether or not it's paid for or not is a separate question. We need to make it discoverable. And so the one call to action I've got is connect, not collect information.
And be ready to connect as well, right? Like, keep your data ready to connect, because we'll need to do it. Fred.
Yeah, I mean, for me, when I look at this, it's I call it the 4 Ps. It's process, people, planet, and partnerships. Starting at the process level, and this is where AI is playing a role, but engaging people, both in terms of the development as well as the interactivity and the intuitivity of that. Then what kind of outcomes on the sustainability side it's going to bring about, but to scale it up, what kind of partnerships that you're going to bring on this angle. The areas that I'm quite excited about is in Europe, buildings as material banks, again, an exciting initiative of how that's going to transform as an enabler of net zero here. Another interesting area is cloud sustainability. I mean, if you look at the hyperscale developers and how they're looking at cloud sustainability and how that's going to transform the net zero journey for some of their customers, and how then that data can drive, it's going to be challenging in terms of how that becomes open data, but that's an exciting space to look at.
Nice. I feel you cramming in things because both of you are such fonts of knowledge, and even an hour probably wouldn't have been enough to really dive into everything that's known. And I'm sure they'll be welcome to connections afterwards if you feel like that would be a thing to do. I just want to double down on partnerships. Like, none of us can do this alone. And the key component of partnerships is people. Like, how are we with each other? How do we relate with each other? How do we support with each other? How open are we with each other? How open are we to figuring out how to connect our organizations together? How open are we to figuring out how to build partnerships that enable us to transform at this level and scale that we need?
Good.
Thank you. Sorry. Thanks, buddy.
Yeah, cool.
Sometimes I feel all the challenge. Thanks, Fred.
Yeah, cool. Thanks, Gavin.
So I think that's it. Thanks.